Hello, and welcome back to this weekly session of Heartfulness. Today, we're picking up the topic of how to deal with anger. This is a topic, which is typically well received because a lot of us are given to anger. And you might again want to start with a quick interaction. Maybe you want to ask in terms of how their practice has been going and whether they've been able to practice meditation, whether they've been able to practice cleaning in the past over the last week, and have a show of hands and ask them what their experience has been, right? Let that go on for a couple of minutes and then ask them, okay, let's come to anger. So how many of you ask them to close their eyes? It makes it a little more, there's a little more intrigue added. Ask them to close their eyes and put up their hand if they feel that they have a problem of anger. Okay, and if they're aged people, you might want to ask them to close their eyes again and ask them to put up their hands if they feel, if their spouses complain that, that they get angry very often, right? They'll get a laugh, and you can tell them, hey, 70% of you thought that you get angry many times, but 90% of you thought that, your spouses feel that you get angry, so it just kind of, it's on a light note, you can start the session and then take a plunge into the topic and really talk about the topic of anger. Let's understand and demystify that a little bit and then see how we can perhaps de-weed this quality and build patience and tolerance within ourselves. To start off, you can put up this quote. Let people absorb it. It is a very deep quote, by Viktor Frankl. It says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Now, this is a very powerful statement because it talks about that there is a space between stimulus and response. Let's say you're driving on the road and somebody honks at you and you shout at them. But in between the two, there is a choice. The space here represents the choice that we can make as to whether we should shout or whether we should go and talk to them. What happens if the stimulus is very strong? Somebody's scraped your car or bike. How then do you react or respond? Right? So that's the space, right? It's a very, it's something, it's good food for thought for us to think about. But let's really see, there are two words which sometimes are used mixed up, but they mean very different things. One is called reaction, the other one is a response. In the first case, let's say that there is an external stimulus and we immediately react. It's almost a spontaneous reaction. And then we think whether we did right or wrong and whether we should have or shouldn't have. In such cases, more often than not, it leads to not such a good outcome. And sometimes it could be explosive. Sometimes it could hurt others. Sometimes it leaves a bad taste in the mouth, right? And more often than not, it creates a not such a positive outcome, and sometimes it can be outright negative outcome. But let us say we've had the good sense that there is an external stimulus and we pause. If you're able to pause, think, go for a walk, come back, and then collect our wits and then respond. Now we're not reacting here, but we're responding because it is a considered response, right? It's a thoughtful response. And in such cases, the outcome could actually be quite different from what it would have been if it had just been a spontaneous response. If it's just we are reacting, more often than not, it creates a series of further activity, typically as what we call as damage control. Okay, and it might go on for days or weeks. And sometimes, right, once you hurt somebody, you lost your friend for a lifetime. But in the other case, even though the stimulus was the same, you actually use that stimulus or the problem to actually create a bond between yourself and another person. And it might actually open up a new path. They say that when we react, right, there's a statement in English which says that four things come not back. There's a very old saying. It says, an arrow that is sped from your bow, a word that is spoken, an opportunity that's lost, and time which you waste. These four things don't come back. So when we speak a word in haste or spontaneously react, many times the damage is already done, and no amount of work later can really restore the situation. But the big question is, this is all good and easy to understand intellectually, but the biggest problem I have with this is that more often than not, when we react spontaneously, we seem to react from a subconscious level. I don't know whether this is space or not. And many times it appears almost as if, given my personality, which is given to anger, which is given to short temper, it almost appears that there is no space at all. And I don't even recognize that there is a space. But when we say pause to think, we are asking you to take an action at the conscious level. So where the reaction is subconscious, how can I bring in a conscious action? How can we pause? So this seems to be a conundrum, right? And this is where most of us have a problem, right? We don't have a problem intellectually understanding the difference between reaction and response, but it doesn't even come to the conscious level. Before that, the fuse is gone and the bomb is blown. So how do we deal with this? And that's where, again, we come back to the same picture. When we deal with life, we deal, again, if you're talking about the mental realm, there are two things which are at work. There's the conscious and the subconscious. Like the conscious is a very small part. In fact, neurologists, they say that your conscious abilities, right, are very, very severely limited. In fact, it can only process about 40 bits per second in terms of actual data. But scientists also tell us that the subconscious is enormous capacity. And the subconscious, you can process almost about 40 million bits a second. So almost there are studies which say that the subconscious is almost 1 billion times more powerful than the conscious ability. So it really follows that any action that we take to correct this trait, we really need to tune ourselves at the subconscious level, and it's not enough to work at the conscious level. And that is where, particularly in terms of cleaning, right, it is the effect of the past thoughts and actions, what we call impressions, which automatically reacts within us when a stimulus is given. I'll give you an example. Let's say that, as a young boy, let's say I was chased by a dog. And the moment I see a dog and it's barking at somebody else, but the moment I hear a dog bark, my system goes into panic mode. And now the dog notices me and starts barking at me, right? Because again, science says that when fear gets generated in me, there's adrenaline which gets secreted. And when that gets secreted, it irritates the dog's nose, and it barks at me. Now it's got to found somebody to bark at. So you see, how it's almost a subconscious process. And this subconscious trigger comes from our past thoughts and actions and the impressions that we have buried within ourselves. So this process of cleaning, what it does is it really helps remove the effect of the past thoughts and actions. And in many sense, right, this helps a lot in being able to reduce our temper. Now, is anger always bad? Or are there some situations in which anger is actually good? What is the right use of anger? Invite the audience to look at this picture and suggest what this picture might mean, right? So you get a few answers. Really, anger is a very, very powerful tool if it is employed for the right purpose. It is said that the right use of anger is not to get angry at others, but we should be angry with ourselves. Why? When When we set standards for our behavior, and when we don't conform to those standards, when we fall short of our own expectations, when we fall short of what we could have achieved and what we actually achieve, when out of laziness, I didn't do something whereas I should have done it and it would have resulted in a much better outcome, we should be angry with ourselves, because this anger then becomes a positive, transformational trigger for me to correct myself, for me to improve myself, for me to bring about that inner change within myself so that the next time around, I will not make the same mistake again. It leads to a positive outcome, and it becomes a trigger for inner transformation. But when anger is used externally, and that's what you see here, right? When they say that when a finger points at somebody else, three fingers are actually pointing at you. But when anger is used externally, it more often than not, it causes harm. It doesn't help the situation. But does it mean that there should be no use of anger externally at all? And that brings us to the second question, right? In terms of the litmus test for self-mastery. For somebody who's mastered themselves, there is really no need for them to lose it in anger. So what's the litmus test? What is that threshold beyond which we should not go? And if there's a need for you to show anger, tell the other person. Let's say a child misbehaves, your own daughter or your own son, and you have to demonstrate anger. You have to show them or tell them that they should see that you are unhappy with what they've done or with how they behaved. And if you're going to show anger, you should show anger. But the litmus test is, are you angry? Have you lost it? In which case it doesn't help. But if you're not angry inside, but you can put on a show of anger outside, that is mastery. How do you know that you're actually showing anger and you're not actually angry? Because 1 minute you can be angry with your daughter, then you can go speak to your husband or mom or father or whatever, right? And you're having a very regular conversation. The anger which you demonstrated, to your daughter or son, it is not bleeding into your other conversations or your other life. It's not poisoning your own mind. So it's like a tool which we use in measured terms. And then you will see that anger can be a very, very powerful tool. With that, let's go to the experience. Since the topic of anger is closely associated with cleaning, it might help for you to walk the audience through the practice of cleaning once again. It will act as a refresher. And perhaps there's no need to do meditation. Okay, just take them through guided cleaning, ask them how they feel, and we're ready to close our session. So what are the takeaways? What are some of the tools that we offer to deal with anger? The first is, if there is a consciously, we realize that there is a space and I can consciously make a choice, then the best would be to pause, to walk away from the scene, come back in 10 minutes, or don't write your email right away. Okay, respond the next day. Take a couple of hours, cool down. Right? If you're able to exercise this, well and good. In many situations, it will work, provided we are able to recognize the space and we are able to exercise the choice. The second technique is what we call left nostril breathing. Sometimes they say just take 10 deep breaths and that helps. Yes, it does, but you can go one step further. Medicine and the medical field, okay, it confirms what yoga has been telling us for thousands of years, that our breathing is not always through both the nostrils. There are two parts to the nervous system. One is called the sympathetic nervous system and the other one is the parasympathetic nervous system. When the sympathetic nervous system, is predominant, we will find ourselves breathing more through the right nostril. And typically, this is active during the day because you are active physically. And at night, when our system is at rest and the system is at what you call digest and rest, at that time, the parasympathetic system is more active, and you will find that you're breathing more through your left nostril. At that time, your system is cool, it's calm, it's not given to activity. So there's a very simple technique that you can use, okay, and which is to reverse this process, which is to breathe through the left nostril deeply, in and out, 10 times. Close your right nostril with your thumb, take a deep breath, exhale through your left nostril again. Again, take an inhale through the left nostril deeply, exhale through the left nostril, and ask them to actually do it then and there, right? And ask them to deep breathe in and out 10 times, right? And again, if they're able to consciously determine that they are overreacting and the stimulus is really causing havoc, if they're able to consciously pause, they can try breathing through the left nostril 10 times, right? And ask them to observe what effect it has. Just this act of breathing through the left nostril, it triggers or activates the parasympathetic system, and we tend to mentally become calmer and more peaceful, so that we're in a better state to respond rather than react. That's the second technique. The third technique, but both these techniques are more like a band-aid, it just kind of provides first aid, okay, when the problem comes up. So how is it that we can truly bring about inner change? And there, the technique that we use is to practice cleaning. Because over a period of time, when we do it consistently, it tends to bring down the quantum of impressions from our past, right? All the effect of the past thoughts and actions, right? I mean, as this storehouse of impressions are clean, we will find that we gain more regulatory control over our own lives. The most spontaneous reaction goes down, and we seem to get that space from which we can make a conscious choice as to whether we should react or whether we should respond. But this is something that for you to try and experience for yourselves. Thank you so much. Okay, we will meet you again next week. Continue to practice your meditation and your cleaning, okay, on a daily basis. Keep notes in a journal. And if the next time in the coming week or weeks, there is an external trigger and you are about to get angry, try and remember some of these techniques and see if you're able to practice it and see what difference it makes. We will take stock next week. Thank you so much.